that you deny it despite despite multiple testimonies, possibly photographs, or possibly eyewitness testimonies, etc., etc. It doesn't mean you deny it on that basis, does it?
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to explain to you. History, the acceptance of something or somebody existing, when you have multiplicity of testimonies, documentation, coins, inscriptions on stones, on rocks, on buildings, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, but
it would then be reasonable to accept that that person existed, right?
The inscriptions and the evidences that we're using in this instance could have, I mean, if that's all we're basing it on.
No, I'm just saying it's reasonable to accept he existed. That's what I'm saying.
It's reasonable to accept it. It's also reasonable to accept, like any other fiction thing that could happen, because it's...
Like what?
I'll go with, we're in England, I'll go with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Do you believe
It's been written down.
Do you believe that Lord of the Rings is true?
I believe that it happened. I believe that it's written there. I can read it. I can see it.
But do you believe that story is actually true life?
No.
Well, no, nor do I. So why are we talking about that?
Because we're jumping from when you're doing saying the.
No, but you don't accept that. I don't accept that. Nobody really accepts it, sensibly speaking, that the Lord of the Rings is a real story. We know it's a fictional story.
And the fictional story, couldn't that apply to the majority of history?
Well, how do we confirm history? I just asked you that before, didn't I?
Yeah.
We confirm history when we have a multiplicity of testimony, of physical evidence. So we feel it's more reasonable than to accept that history than to deny it. Now, the more we find, the more convinced we become, don't we?
Yes and no. We can accept it. But we can't know for fact.
I didn't ask you to look. We're having two conversations here. I'm not saying that we have to accept it as a 100%.
Okay.
I'm saying it's reasonable to accept it because of the multiplicity of the evidences, the physical evidences, the testimonial evidences, the writings, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, it becomes reasonable to accept that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And especially when you have, for example, people who don't have a dog in the race, non-Muslim academics, for example. We have a poster there.
Yeah, I read that earlier, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot, I'm pretty sure there's a lot more to William Graham's quotation than that.
Well, that is a direct quotation from him.
Right, but I think there was more to it than.
Well, I would not.
Than that sentence,
well, I would not.
I believe it doesn't it go into like a 1924 version of the Quran. Or am I thinking of something else? Maybe I might be wrong. Don't quote me.
Yeah,
I think it was more to that article than that sentence.
Well, the sentence is quite profound, I think, and quite clear. I think Angela Knuth's sentence is actually quite, or a paragraph there is very clear as well. Basically, what she's saying is that the manuscript evidence that we have, including carbon dating, seems to confirm the Muslim narrative of an early fixed 7th century text, then challenge
You're talking
it.
about the one in the
Birmingham
library?
So the Birmingham manuscript that was discovered has been carbon dated.
I saw that yesterday.
Okay, it's been carbon dated to around the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah, but wasn't that before though?
No, it's for. I think you must know a bit about science. When you do carbon dating, you have a band of
a range.
A range, yeah, and it could be 100 years or 150 years. What the carbon dating of that manuscript proves.
I might have a picture of it. I think I took a picture.
What it proves is that it could have been at the time of the Prophet or shortly after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So what I'm saying to you is that we have good reasons to believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, existed. We have manuscript evidence, carbon dated, that shows and that provides evidence, I believe, hard scientific evidence, that the Quran was an early fixed text.
Yeah, but I think the carbon dating for the 4 pieces they have actually predate.
Nothing predates the Prophet
Muhammad.
Muhammad.
Like 580 to 630.
Yeah, but what does carbon dating mean? Carbon dating means that you have a band That'll be 100 or 150 years.
Okay.
It could be decades or half a century before a particular event may have happened, or it could be 50 or up to maybe 100 years after the event actually happened. But what it shows is it happened in that era, that time. Around about that time.
That time was, I don't know this, I want to say it was 5 something to 6, around the time of Muhammad, 640. Can't remember the date. I know I had pictures on my other phone. But wouldn't that be before? It could be in the range or before.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, what does that tell us?
What that tells us that the limitations on the data that we have only gives us a band. But what it does do is it puts that document in that era.
In that era. Or before.
Which means, well, that era is within the 100 years or 150 years limitations of carbon dating.
Okay.
Yeah?
Was it that wide of a range? I thought it was like 60 years or something.
The range is generally quite wide.
Okay.
So you can't say analytically or empirically this is the date, but all you can do with carbon dating is it says it falls within these boundaries.
Okay.
Which
so
basically
what if it fell in the boundary of 590? Because I know it went.
So if it falls within the boundary, for example, where it could never have happened at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, i.e. 300 years before or something, then you'd have an argument.
I think the range, was 5. I know it was 5 something.
572 is where the Prophet was born.
So if it fell in that range, 570, say 572 or 575, would that not negate that it was a revelation at 6 something?
No, because carbon dating just gives you a band. It just puts something roughly in that era. You can't say that it definitely came before, or you can't claim definitely it came afterwards. All you can do, it has limitations.
Within this certain
band, that's it.
Okay.
So either way, I can't make the argument that it was 610. Just as you can't make the argument that it's 520.
Right.
Do you understand my point?
Yeah,
so
that
all it does.
Questions, I think.
No,
I mean not so much questions, but it would for me. I got to accept that whole range, so I have to accept the earliest range and the latest range.
Yes.
So would that not?
So then, how would you
definitively say it was
right
at that time?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So what you would do is you would look for other collaborating evidence to shed light on what the date is more likely to be. So for example, let's say the document talks about some aspect of history. So now you can tie it down to a particular event or a particular time.
Which doc? You talking about the Birmingham?
I'm just saying any document.
Okay.
You could say, is there any other material evidence that suggests a date? Like a coin, for example. And if you don't find any coins earlier than 20 years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, then it's reasonable to assume that there probably weren't any. Because all you find is those that came after. If you find rock inscriptions that came after and none before, it's reasonable to assume that because we've investigated and we've looked at, that the later date seems more plausible.
Okay.
If we have other documents, many other manuscripts that all date after, shortly after, or a century after, or 50 years after, it then seems reasonable that it was a later date and not the earlier date. So there's a collaboration of different aspects of evidence.
The coins that you're referring to, or the rocks, have they been carbon dated?
Have they been?
Have the inscriptions on those been?
Yes. So for example, we know that a particular king existed at a particular time. We know historically that they had a reign for so many years or whatever. And if somebody now historically has a battle with somebody and they take over that particular people and they stamp something on the coin, then it's highly likely that it came from that era, basically. So all I'm asking you to do is it reasonable? That's all I'm saying to you.
It's as reasonable as it's unreasonable at this point.
So despite all the collaborating evidence to show that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, existed, you're saying it's as reasonable that he didn't exist?
That's when you say collaborating evidence that he existed, I'm not sure that there is collaborating evidence that he existed.
Do you believe anybody in history existed?
Sure.
Who?
I believe my grandparents existed. I believe other people that my great-grandparents, I believe that those things, I can't definitively say that Jesus existed.
No. I'm just saying historical figures. Abraham Lincoln, did he exist?
Yes.
Why do you believe he existed?
Because I'm from America and half of our history is related to Abraham Lincoln. There's paintings of him, there's statues of him, there's a lot of evidence to substantiate his existence. The evidence
So if there was, so hold on a second.